So to present you, today I will not exactly present the results of those field trips, but more or less my research in general, which was mainly my PhD thesis, and now I will also introduce you to new questions that I'm tackling based on the findings, based on the mistakes done in the thesis or in the aftermath of the thesis, etc. And maybe I would try to welcome you to join that kind of research in the future, so we can open up a new research agenda in the region. So basically, I want you now to just, as Emil said, the title is State as Social Practice, Sources, Resources, and Forces in Central Asia. This is a comparative research. I was looking at 3 cases, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, but mainly focusing on the Fergana Valley, on the borderlands that connect these 3 countries. This can pose all possible methodological issues, and you can easily ask me at the end of this presentation. I would be happy to answer. But for now, that's it. So you know that we are now in the state building literature. We are thinking about state and society relations in general. So now imagine year 2010, 10th of June, right, or July. At 2 a.m. there was azan, the call for prayer in the Osh city, that nobody expected, and it was asking people, calling people to go and find a cover, right? So you know what we are talking about is the inter-ethnic tensions between Kyrgyz and Uzbek people in Osh in the south that also spilled over to Jalalabad and neighboring villages. About 500 people died, thousands were injured, and about 3,000 buildings probably were destroyed, okay? So, traumatic and dangerous event. Then I want you now to move to 2005, Andijan, right? When there was a jailbreak and several people just gathered at the Babur Square, and then the followers gathered as well, joined them, and many people just protested against the government, and that ended up in the massacre when hundreds of people were killed, and the Human Rights Watch later called it the greatest massacre in Asia in the latest years. Then we think about Tajikistan, and we move to its post-civil war history. When you have almost every other year, you have some problem. You have a military operation here in Rush, 2010, after the jailbreak. Then you have 2012, the summer, and military operation in Badashan. 2014, when government undertook the preemptive action against the opposition. The same in 2015. So what it gives us is that Central Asia has been going through these traumatic times. And there has been violence all the time, which then literature and the scholarship on state building, state-society relations takes as indicators of state failure, right? You're all familiar with the literature. That's why we are called, Central Asian states are called failed states or failing states or fragile states, wherever you wanted to put on that continuum, right? But the thing is, the problem is, however, so what was the question of my thesis is then, how come all the 3 states that have chosen different paths at the beginning of independence in the 90s have ended up in the same situation, in the situation of the so-called weak state? When we look at them, like most of the literature looks at these states as similar, because we all share Soviet past, post-colonial state, right? In my thesis, I shift this causality, I shift this logic, and I'm saying that these are 3 different states in the sense that they've chosen different policies. If you imagine the continuum and put Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan on it, you have almost isolationist policies in Uzbekistan, right? They didn't want to open up until a certain point, at least for the first 10 years. Then you have on the other extreme Kyrgyzstan that was open to all the liberal reforms possible, and please come and organize your civil society, NGOs, and whatever else you want. We all even joined the WTO, or like the first ones among the Central Asian states, I think. So, and then you have Tajikistan that was torn by the civil war, and then had to still liberalize through the shock therapy after the civil war. So that was completely top down, and the government almost didn't have a chance to choose. So, so these three countries were different at the beginning in terms of which policies they've chosen, the degree of liberalization they've chosen, the degree of decentralization they've chosen, market liberalization. So if you look at the main things like market liberalization, decentralization, and openness to media and foreign external civil society organizations like NGOs, and so we were all at a different part of this continuum, right? How come in the late 20s we all end up as what I call in my thesis, in my research in general, incomplete state? That was the big research question. So the first thing, to just explain you a little why I've chosen the concept incomplete state instead of following failed states, is that as I will show you, I want to shift the causality of this literature. So basically, conventional logic, the conventional wisdom, conventional causality would be linear. It would be based on transitology approach, which would say state is rationalization of social relations, which means we have a society that then rationalizes itself, something happens, it develops linearly, and then comes to the state, to a strong state, a democratic state for that matter. It didn't happen to us, right? Instead, most of the literature was really addressing our state still as failed, looking at this line, at this transitology approach, saying we failed because we didn't end up in the point B. However, the problem, and the indicators they've chosen, it was like, look, they have this retraditionalizing, traditional communities, indigenous communities, they have that degree of violence, this degree of violence. Yeah, that's true, but is that traditionalization the result of liberalization, or have we just been there and we haven't developed to the certain point? So that was one of the puzzles that I had, and that's why I said no. Basically, retraditionalization is the result of market liberalization, of course with local allure, with local taste, because we did it in a different way. But so the causality is not linear. Then the other literature would tell us that we fail, the states fail here because we have neopatrimonial structures, because there's corruption, kinship, relationships, network-based society, etc., etc. But if that's true, if every politician brings his or her own relative, how come the elite doesn't represent the society? How come the structure of elite doesn't reflect societal organization in a way? Because if that was true, if the line was completely like from A to B, then we could end up at a perfect structure. Basically, we have this elite, it represents this region and this group, and then we have that elite and that region and that group. Then they can come to a discussion, like whatever, and develop some kind of political system. But this doesn't happen. If we are neopatrimonial states and societies, which is like also a very fancy argument in the state building literature these days, how come we don't end up we still fail to govern, right? If it's all our relatives and neighbors. So that was another puzzle that I had. And what I did try to, then the next maybe block of literature that helps is this division between formality and informality. It says, you all know, it says that basically there are a lot of informal structures and they influence the formal structures and they have more power, and that's why, right? Primitively speaking. But then if there's this division between formality and informality, if you look at the biography of our parliament, each of them and the parliament in general, you could see that the same person used to be, say, a criminal in law in the 90s, or it has connections to the Camp 31, where most of the politicians, like politicians, spend their time, let's say. So, or they were indirectly connected to certain illicit revenues that they were getting through certain organizations. So this illegal and legal, the formal and informal, it's not divided anymore, it's intermingled. So what we need to address is these areas where they overlap, okay? And that's what my research is trying to do. I draw it from the literature of like very classical, basically, literature. Sometimes to be alternative, you just get back to the classics in a way. If you take Michael Mann and Charles Tilly, you can find, or James Scott, you can find a lot of ideas on how to tackle. And for example, Michael Mann calls it processes of interstitial emergence. The idea is that it's not possible, it's impossible to institutionalize society to such extent that informality never appears. It's impossible. There will always be areas between institutions and society where other processes will be evolving. And these shadow areas are of the interest of my research. It's very difficult to tackle them methodologically, but I will show you now how I will explain how I try to tackle that. So basically, the argument of my research before, and now I changed it a little, was that also very simple, seemingly very classical, but at the same time, you'll see how this basic approach brings us to something more interesting. We say we shouldn't look at the linear causality, but we look at the set of factors that when they interact, they bring us to patterns and processes that explain things. Well, maybe not explain things, but help to better understand. Okay? So I took 3 classical things, like external actors, historical, legacy, and local elites, balance of power between local elites. But the difference is that historical legacy, I mean, we all know that this region has been approved through Soviet legacy kind of arguments, saying that Soviet Union has collapsed, but certain things haven't disappeared, that's why, or that there's this still Soviet mentality among the elite, and that's why it doesn't work. However, we know that institutionally, Soviet Union has collapsed, right? And we introduced liberalization and all of that. So what I'm looking at is the societal legacy of past, or Soviet past, if you wish. You can also look a bit deeper, because then Soviet past has its own past, and you never know where it really comes from, right? If it's Soviet or or what is local, what is not. So basically, societal legacy that I'm looking at is the relationship between water, land, and people and communities. Again, sounds basic, right? Why are we looking at water and land? If you look at how decollectivization process has happened in this region, is that again, I'm taking the example of water, you can take example of something else. It can be land, it can be other, but the resource needs to be like fluid. And when you look at decollectivization process, in terms of water redistribution, you know that it was governed in terms of 3 tiers. There was the Soviet, the central directive, then there was regional, and then there was the 3rd tier water distribution, which was in the hands of farms, of kolkhozes, right? Collective farms. So whatever, like we now have agreements after the collapse, we have agreements how to manage the first 2 tiers. We don't have agreements, or even if we do, they don't work, how to redistribute water at the basic level among communities that was happening behind the gates of kolkhozes, collective farms. So in one of my case studies is showing the example of Isfara River, which is flowing through all these enclaves. This is the Fergana Valley, right? If you look, there are a lot of little enclaves that go into the territory of the neighboring states. You're all familiar with that, right? So Isfara River would be passing, is a perfect example because it passes through all three parts of Fergana Valley. Tajik, Uzbek, and Kyrgyz. So what happens is that the redistribute, like in practical terms, what happens when you need to redistribute certain amount of water for like at a very, very grassroots level between different households, you have an authority that, for example, resides in formally Uzbek part, but then you distribute it, say, for practically Tajik part. And then you have also Kyrgyz citizens living there, Kyrgyz communities living there, okay? And that's where, as we know, conflicts come from, the clashes, etc. But it's not only conflicts, it's also cooperation. Because when I interviewed some people in Soh and Shahir Mardan and Vorukh, they tell you that basically what the idea you get is that there will always be someone informal who helps, someone they trust, the informal leaders, etc., who helps this water redistribution. It still doesn't go without problems, but informality, right? So that was one of the examples of Soviet legacy, because Soviet Union have created, there was a law on the actual use of land, you know it, right? Actual use of resources. So you could just use it regardless of the borders. Now, when you have national borders, you have problems. Because rivers remain international, processes remain transnational, borders make us national. So what's the point of this example is that Fergana Valley shows us that you can be both isolated and transnational as a society. And when I looked at the external actors, how I should connect it to the argument is that when you look at the external actors, what they do, they build borders. Like BOMCA, we know the border management, the European Border Management Program, and the Central Asian Anti-Drug Program, they go together. It's the Integrated Border Management Program that started in 2000 after the invasion of Islamic movement of Uzbekistan to the Fergana Valley. And what they started to do, they started materializing the border. We had the administrative borders that were created during the Soviet time, but they were not materialized in the sense, there were not so many checkpoints, not so many wire bribes, fences, or mines, if you wish, right? And that's when the borders gets materialized, you isolate those little societies in there. And as you know, like around the Soh, in some parts, Kyrgyzstan even built wire fence. And it's both psychological trauma and physically it's difficult for people to move. So that's how I show that when we have parallel processes that, for example, external actors create materialized borders, then we have still the legacy, historical legacy of societal interdependence. And you can see it in the example of water. You can see it very well in the example of trade, if you want to address it, cross-border trade. Both isolation and transnational, isolated and transnational, which is paradoxical and very interesting. And one of the factors one of the processes. So I showed you which factors bring us to this process, and one of the processes that then explains why the state is incomplete. So that's another example with external actors, which is very interesting and needs more research than has been done, is the Central Asian Economic Cooperation, CEREC, and CASA, Central Asia South Asia Energy Project, right? CASA 1000. It's a World Bank project, it's Asian Development Bank project, they do it together. The idea is, right? The economic cooperation is about developing the cross-border trade and connecting the unlocking the landlocked region. That's how they put it, right? Because we are considered a landlocked region. And so unlocking this region, they bring us to be connected with Pakistan, Afghanistan, more in Middle East. So how? By infrastructure projects that this project also involves. There are different infrastructure projects, okay? And then CASA works together with TAREK. And CASA is about connecting the energy power grids of Kyrgyzstan with Tajiks and going to Kabul and Pakistan and so on, right? So this water will be will be given to the South Asia in a way. But it sounds beautiful, right? It's development, it's helping countries that are kind of more poor than ours, it's developing water policies and resources, beautiful. But then if you look at societal consequences of this, in practice, what does TAREK do? They support what they call non-standard cross-border trade. What does it mean, non-standard cross-border trade? It means you're supporting shadow economy. Because non-standard cross-border trade is done through bazaars, through informal markets, and it's 40% of the whole trade. So, do you see the problem? Like, what is it they're doing? You are liberalizing trade, you are unlocking the region, but you are supporting the shadow. Without giving the mechanisms of getting these people out of the shadow, getting them out of the informality. Okay? And the structure, the social structure for that is bazaar. It's very important to remember the bazaar because that will connect later. So before they did it, they had done research in different bazaars, cross-border, like bordering bazaars in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. But when I looked at which bazaars, where they interviewed people, which bazaars, they don't include the biggest one. They don't include those that are in Xinjiang, because it also connects to Xinjiang, so that goes through from China. So Xinjiang wasn't interviewed, wasn't researched, and the Pakistani tribal belt wasn't. Okay? You have two very problematic areas that are out of the data, out of statistics. Okay? You're still claiming that this will be good for the society, that will develop economy, and that will develop the state. Okay? A problem? Yes, a problem. Comes with liberalization? Yes, it comes with liberalization, formally, technically. CASA. Now think again in practical terms. What will happen if before you build this line, energy, before you connect the energy grid, you need to build stations, right? You need to build those stations. And when you look at how it goes, I think my next slide has it. Maybe this map doesn't show it, but there are different maps on the World Bank's website you can find where you can see that Salang Pass in Afghanistan is on the way. And you know that Salang Pass is one of the most difficult areas, both geographically and socially, right? It's very conflict prone, etc., etc. So you're building the infrastructure without considering what kind of communities are living there, what kind of social relationships, power relation, what kind of elite is there. Right? And by building, you need to displace people. When you build such a huge infrastructure, you displace people, you move them somewhere else, like it was done during the Stalinist times when people were displaced. What happens when you displace people? They lose basically everything. Yes, they get a certain amount of money to build up new houses, but is that enough to build up the history, the social history? And if you look at how, when I looked at how communities claim land rights in Afghanistan, especially in the part of Salang Pass and nearby, it always has to do with history of your family. A lot of it is custom-based. It's not written. It's like you have to go to that neighbor. That neighbor has to prove that your grandfather, great-grandfather got this piece of land, this matters, this still matters for the legal system of those communities because partly they're based on Sharia law, partly on, centralized legislation, which is not really widespread still to those areas, and partly it's the memory. It's a legislation based on memory, community memory. You need the community, the memory community, if you want to call it that way, to prove that you have a right to own this piece of land and therefore this house and therefore this business which stands there, whatever you have there. Little shop, bazaar, no matter how you survive, you know. It connects to that history. So building that infrastructure, displacing people, what do? you destroy the whole elite structure, societal structure. Maybe it's for good, maybe it's for bad. It's a matter of another research, right? It's normative, you can say what's better. But as a matter of fact, you destroy the historical societal organization. Another example of this, a very vivid example, is Rangoon Dam. If CASA 1000 continues and succeeds, it has to build Kambarata 1, Kambarata 2, and Rangoon, especially Rangoon, because we need more power, energy power, to send that water as far as like the Pakistani tribal belt, for example, right? So you need a more powerful power station, energy station. Rangoon, as you all know, is very problematic. People discuss whether it will be an engineered disaster for the region or not, because if it collapses, the whole Fergana Valley, the previous slide, will be flooded, right? Well, okay, that's future. We don't have, maybe we can avoid it. What's today with Rangoon? Basically, when you imagine Vakhsh River, where the Rangoon stands, there are communities on the left bank, and if you start building it, you have to flood certain area. It means before you flood it, you displace people. According to the World Bank statistics, 42,000 people will have to be displaced. 42,000. By now, only 2,000 already have been displaced, moved to another regions of Tajikistan. But those that remain, they are isolated because there's water everywhere. And the process of construction goes slowly, so people don't get bridges to get connected, etc. So another problem, social problem, that you start destroying societal organization. And then you can tell me, okay, maybe they're displaced. They are actually moved. If you don't think you know, but Vakhsh River, the Rangoon, is situated in Rasht Valley. Rasht Valley is one of the most problematic Tajik areas, Badakhshan, Rasht, and then Isfarar, right? Where they had a lot of so-called Islamic resistance to the government, and we had jailbreak in Rasht in 2010, etc. So what it tells us politically is the government doesn't have control of that area. Okay? It doesn't have control of the local elites, of that area. But if it destroys the societal organization, if it moves people, it also removes elites. And the regions where the people from the left bank of Vakhsh moved are the ones that are under the control of the presidential clan. It's nearby, like Tavildara, nearby the Dushanbe. I'll have to look up the names. So you move those people there, you give them cash, you don't give them land, and you don't give them household. You expect them to build their own household. But then if you think about how Tajik society has survived by now, it's probably mostly agriculture, right? I mean, the poor part, the rural part. It's agriculture, you need that land to survive. So, okay, we get another problem of what's going on, what will be happening with the society and state-society relations. What else I wanted to say is that at the same time, in parallel, the budget for the social welfare, because I was checking, okay, maybe they moved them, but then there is this social welfare program and people would get help, medical. The budget is very low, and in those years, it actually dropped for 5%. So you already have it low, and then you get more people, and then you lower the budget. There's really little chance that these people will live a decent life, okay? So you just increase the inequality, you increase the poor class, and you deprive people of possibilities. So that's how I look at the external actors, at societal consequences of external actors' programs, because most literature, what it does, it just looks, look, this is Bomga, these are our borders, now we have strong borders, and Islamic movements, these scary people will never enter this territory. Yeah, okay, but you get much more potential for social resistance than you used to have before. So you isolate societies, you create certain pockets that are not under your control, but then they are like part of transnational processes. Think about non-standard cross-border trade. It's still a transnational process. In any transnational processes, especially if it involves money, you have leaders. So the loyalty of people is getting outsourced from the state to some other power networks. And that's Michael Mann's idea as well. He calls it power networks, transnational power networks. I use the term in my research as well, saying that that's how you lose your people, that's how you outsource ideological source of state power, and that's how communities of resistance appear. So in the end, the question is it really Islamist radicalization, extremism, and terrorism that's the problem? Is it really the religion that is such problematic? Or is it what we build and how we organize, basic, like really basic things? Now, just to give you a break and give you a bit of the context how this research has started. This research has started as a study on radicalization, on counterterrorism. Okay, so basically my idea was to say that, to use securitization theory and to say there's no threat of radicalization, but it's securitized. It's becoming political because it's beneficial for politics. That's why there's no threat of radicalization. However, after the first fieldwork in 2012, then after the second fieldwork in 2014, and I've done it independently, and then I've done it also for the OSCE. So there we had a bit more resources to look at and a bit more data than I could collect individually, which proved that there is a radicalization. There is a potential for resistance, but I call it social resistance. It can be Islamic, it can be something else. It doesn't matter. It just happens to be Islamic because all the conditions are conducive. Okay? So, yeah, communities of resistance or Islam, in literature, there's some literature that calls it Islam of resistance. It's a very beautiful term, I like it. I think it more or less reflects the reality. I call it just social resistance or communities of resistance. Okay, we addressed historical, we addressed external, and I don't want to go into local elites. It will be a little more boring than this. And yeah, basically that's what you get. These are the societal consequences that you get from interaction of these three sets of factors. Elites, again, the part on elites looks at how informal and formal elites. I look at the biography of parliament in each country and show that there is no divide between, such a strict divide between formal and informal. And you have to deal with that methodologically somehow in the future. Yes. So that's it in the nutshell, I think. There's more to it, but yeah, maybe if you're interested why Islam and why radicalization has kind of slipped the area at the end as a result, because I interviewed at least 50 people from Hizb ut-Tahrir movement, and I had about 10 from Islamic movement, of the former guys, or what they say so. Then families of people who are now imprisoned. Some of them were so kind as to show me the diaries of their children. It was very interesting to read, very, very beautiful reading in some way. Then I also looked at the archives of the State Commission on Religious Affairs in all the three countries. So what I tried to analyze is the narratives. Okay? So in my research, I call it underground narratives of parallel civil society. So the idea is one of the results was that you have this civil society that we think we have, the NGO-based civil society, which was brought about by the Western donors at the beginning. And then you have a parallel civil society, as I call it, that emerged from the ground, that emerged from those routines and problems, common problems, how they organize trade and bazaars. But they emerged, they are unstructured. So the problem with research, coming back to Emil's first, since he promised you I would talk a little bit on Islamic part, the problem with researching Islamist radicalization in their region is that if you only go, what I did at the beginning, I used the conventional sociological indicators like how many followers, how many violent acts, structure of an organization, who's the leader, how they work, how they organize. This approach doesn't work. If you follow this, it tells you there is no problem, there is no radicalization at all. Because officially there are not so many followers, officially they are very unstructured. Even Hizb ut-Tahrir that claims to have the cells, it doesn't really work that way in reality. So what I noticed that the problem is more difficult, it's unstructured. They do, like, I use 3 indicators: entrism, transnationalism, and cross-sectionality, to show you that the threat is a big word, but the problem is there, but you have to address it from a different angle. So I look at how, when I interviewed people in the bazaars about non-standard trade, I asked them, like, who is supporting, who was like investing in their first, when they just started organizing their little business. And then it appears that it's all community-based, and then this community, they also believe in those or these ideas, and they sometimes participate in the gathering of this or that movement. It looks very innocent. It looks, you know, they just are interested and they just want to survive. But as a matter of fact, as a result, you still get, well, again, infiltration, if I may. Right? So that the members of certain movements, they, through Ashar system, through the mutual trust system, they participate in the bazaars, they participate in the shadow economy, they participate. They share common routines, and then if you I managed to look at non-standard trade a bit more on water. If you manage to look more on this routine, how it's, you can prove, you can show the infiltration part. Then when you look at this movement, at the members again, you trace them back to where they come from, and you can see how international or how transnational they are. Again, methodologically you can question it, because if the person is from that country, does it mean, okay, he is involved in those power structures or not? That's a big and difficult thing to do methodologically, but some pattern is there. So that's why they are transnational, especially if you take ideology. If you look at the ideas part, you then come to Manuel Castell's idea, who said these are communities of resistance, transnational, and networks of resistance. Literature, it's beautiful, helping this idea to be developed. Okay, and cross-sectionality is what I told you before, that sometimes the same people participate in legal business activities, in political activities, and religious activities. So you have different sections: economic, social, political. Like, go basic. Like, the more basic you go, the better results you get. Like, you look at the basic sociological divisions, and you look at who participates and how that's connected, and you see it's cross-sectional. So again, you challenge the conventional wisdom of the literature, that there is a divide, informal, formal, that it doesn't work. You challenge the conventional wisdom on how you quantify, how you define that you have radicalization, for example, or that you have a failed state. You challenge that. You might still contribute, because you do not say this is irrelevant. You just say, yeah, it may be a new look at an old data, or it may be an old look at the new data, or something like that, right? After all, that's all what as social scientists you have to do, to say if some new thought-provoking questions could be derived from old data, for example. Okay, I hope I didn't forget anything. As a conclusion, I want to tell you that, like, future questions for future research could be looking at the bazaar. Why anthropological approach in Emil is very valuable, because Emil is always looking at like little structure and then shows you a big process, right? Anthropology does it, right? So you can look at one little person and write the whole social history of the state he lives in. You look at one little bazaar as a social structure and tell us so much about religion, ideology, economy, international actors, international aid, investments, politics, etc. And bazaar is one of those structures, so where there's a lot of potential for research. I just tackled one little part of it. Then you can look at mahallas, you can look at mosques, through which you can see things and big processes, if you do it anthropologically. So the question for research now that we need to address, or you can address, is where will we end up if we support, like, say, Tzarek or Kasa, if we support non-standard, we support shadow because we want to liberalize and liberal ideology allows us to, where will we end up? And then we will come to retraditionalization, because since these structures are part of the liberalization, we get the retraditionalization, we retraditionalize, and then scholars say, this society is just so conservative and traditional. Are we really so conservative and traditional? Is there really an indigenous culture? What is it? Is there really the Central Asian Islam, the traditional Islam that was there before the Soviets came and then they oppressed everything, what was local? Really? Did they oppress, or did they contribute to making of those? And after the collapse, maybe it's not about that there are indigenous communities or traditional communities, but more about that we revive them, and then they take weird forms that existed neither before the Soviet time nor during the Soviet time. They are traditional, but they are neither nor, and they are kind of liberal. They are products of liberal policies. How? It's not to undermine liberal thesis. It's not to say that we should not liberalize. I think we should. It's just a matter of understanding how to get there without transforming into something pre-modern. Okay? So that's one of the questions that I thought I could suggest to you. And there were many. I just wrote down maybe 2 or 3 for you. Communities. When you look at the international actors programs on empowering communities, be it water communities or distribution communities, be it agricultural communities, does a community have a legal persona? An individual has, right, in liberal state building, whatever system. Does the community have a legal persona? And if it does, or if it should, how? Okay? How then avoid the retraditionalization? How then to still liberalize? Yeah, and then maybe final, very theoretical thing is that state building literature, again, since its transitology is the main and the conventional wisdom, it says that we need to decentralize, right? With the market liberalization comes also political decentralization. That's what Kyrgyzstan has been doing since the beginning. We tried to give more. Uzbekistan wasn't doing that. Initially, it was organized in a different way. Tajikistan was partly doing it for some part, then changing back again. And now, okay, we tried to decentralize because we tried to be democratic. Where did we end up? We have, as I said, considering other processes that happened, we ended up in highly fragmented society with isolated pockets where the state doesn't reach, doesn't do anything. So that's Charles Tilly's also warning. It was his warning, actually, classically. He was saying, look, decentralization can bring you to a highly fragmented society. And highly fragmented society, is it conducive to state building? Is it conducive to completing state building process? Is it conducive to bridging the gap between state and society, and hence resolving this resistance, radicalization, conflicts? Bring in the peace, okay? So on this happy note, I would like to finish my presentation, and I open the floor for your questions.